So our final speaker is Jane Cox. Jane will be exploring how psychology is using gaming and tech with an emphasis on the future of tech and games, particularly around psychology. She's a PhD candidate in psychology and games with the University of Sunshine Coast, conducting research on making games positive change. She's spoken extensively nationally and internationally about psychology and games and was awarded as one of the top 30 game changers in Australia last year. Please welcome Jane.
Thank you. Thanks, Kristen. And thank you all for coming tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll not talk a lot about my particular research, but what I'd like to do is just give you a little bit of a flavour of what's going on in the industry in psychology and games, a little bit in the past, what's happening presently, some pretty cool research out there, and where I think maybe it might head in the future. So this is me. I come from a very psychology research background, so I've got a degree in behavioural science, and now my PhD is in interactive media and psychology, so that's where I'm from. So I'll just start with this, and it feeds very much into all what everyone's been saying here tonight already, is that there's something just a little bit different. It's a whole different context when we're talking about interactive media and interactive technology. It's not didactic because we're interacting with it. So our experiences and the context is experiential. So Brenda Romero is one of our industries, the game industry's international most long-standing game designers, and yeah, she has great things to say about why interactivity is so very powerful. So I'll just start with the psychology of games. Do we have any video game players in the room? Who plays games? Anyone? A few, that's good. Now, games are very popular. According to the latest Digital Australia report, we've got 98% of households across Australia that actually have consoles and video game equipment. With our average age of gamers is mid-30s, and rate of gameplay is, virtually even across genders. And so why is it? Why is gaming so popular? Well, one of the theories is that it actually satisfies a lot of our core psychological needs. So this is where self-determination theory comes in. So what we need as humans to survive and flourish and feel good about ourselves is these three things. We need competence, we need relatedness, and we need autonomy. So the one thing that games are really good at is all of these things, actually, not just one thing, three things. They're excellent at allowing us to feel competent at things. That feedback loop that we were talking about before is inherent in games. They start off easy and they get a little bit more difficult. They also give us autonomy, so we can make choices in games and have that sense of autonomy. They also give us opportunities for relatedness, so they're really good. We should play more of them. They also allow us to put in place PERMA, which is a theory of flourishing. They give us positive emotions. They're engaging us in a particular activity. They allow us to form new relationships, create new meaning, and of course have that competence with accomplishment that comes with games. So it's no surprise that games are starting to get serious, and they're not just for entertainment anymore. They're actually being applied to problems for education, as we've seen here tonight with all these examples, and they're also being used in psychological aspects. So this first example is a breathtaking journey with the orange boxes and the carts. This is actually a game that helps people foster empathy by putting people in a VR situation of crossing a border illegally and creating empathy for what that experience feels like. So we can talk till the cows come home about illegal immigrants and here's the facts and here's what's happening, but until we actually experience we've got a whole different perception. So that was a really powerful intervention that was done recently in Europe. The second one is by a local developer, Disparity Games. It's actually a family-based studio up in Brisbane, or up at the Sunshine Coast. And this game in the middle here is Ninja Pizza Girl. It's about a girl, she's a ninja, she delivers pizzas. But actually what it is it's a game about building self-esteem and resilience in the face of bullying. So it's a game for teenage girls to feel like, you know, a ninja, because all teenage girls are ninjas, and help them to develop that confidence. And that's been really, really, really popular. I definitely recommend it for yourselves and your kids. The third one, the Dragon Collective Trilogy, was an educational project, which was a mixed reality project which taught kids, unbeknownst to them, how to speak Chinese. And it was basically an ARG, so there was information all across emails, there was notes that they had to find, there was locations they had to visit. It was like a big treasure hunt, but it was all about Chinese. So that was very cool. So just a quick look at the past. You've probably heard of Lumosity. Portal 2 is actually more effective at problem solving, helping us to problem solve, developing spatial skills and persistence than Lumosity. So games are actually really great at doing these psychological and cognitive processes than games designed to do that. Think, Feel, Do is a game that is based on CBT. It provides therapy for depression. It shows significant improvement in symptoms after 6 sessions. Now, this was a successful game, but again, it's in the past, it was quite didactic. As is Sparks, where we defeat NATs, negative automatic thoughts, and restore balance to the environment. But again, it's kind of bit didactic. Here's the information, here's what we do with it, and you know, I think we've got opportunities to actually develop a little bit more experiential based opportunities. So I'll go into some present stuff. This is a game called Seven Doors. I was the game designer for this game recently in New York as part of the XR Brain Jam, which is part of the Games for Change Festival recently. We developed this over the course of 2 days. It's based on DBT concepts, and it was set in using the context of Free Roam VR. So there's 7 skills, and what we wanted to do was provide an experiential approach of each of these 7 skills by setting it in a little hub, as that first picture, and then creating experiences for each one of these skills so that they could learn, not by just learning the skill and reading about it, but actually having a visual framework and an experiential framework for what that skill is actually about. The second case study that I'll talk about is Snow World, which I think you touched on this before, which is physical therapy using VR. In this case, it's with burn victims. It's a virtual reality game which is utilised on patients. Snow World was designed for children, and they played this game when their wounds were being redressed, which is a really painful experience, and they would generally, the gold standard practice is to give morphine at this point, but the game, the kids that played Snow World were actually more pain-free playing Snow World than getting morphine, so it was pretty amazing. The third one, which I'll talk about, is an amazing example of how virtual reality can be used in a completely non-didactic way. So Nevermind is a VR game. It's biofeedback. So that means that they're wearing some kind of sensor, either a neurological sensor, or in some cases you can use an Apple Watch or a heart rate monitor, feeds back into the game, and this is how we can teach emotional regulation and relaxation by playing a horror game. Makes sense, right? So the way it works is you play the game and you come across horror stimulus. which makes your heart rate go up a little bit. And so then when the game notices that your heart rate's kind of going up a little bit, you're a bit anxious, the game gets harder. So what you actually have to do to get through the game is to develop what's called interoceptive awareness. So an awareness of your physiological response of anxiety, rising anxiety. This is something that most of us actually have trouble with as it's rising. We notice when we're there, when we're right at the top and we're kind of peeking out a little bit, like when you're giving a presentation, or, you know, but we're not so great at when it's developing. So that's what this game is really great at, is it's giving you the opportunity to really rehearse that feedback loop of interoceptive awareness so that you can then use your breathing and use your relaxation techniques to bring you back so that the difficulty level comes down and you can finish the game. So there's no didactic information in that game whatsoever, but it is super effective at training relaxation and interoceptive awareness. This, I'm not sure how much time I've got left, 1 minute. I'll spend 30 seconds here. This is my PhD in a slide, which I'm not going to be able to explain at all. But what I'm doing is I'm developing a framework to design health-related behaviour change games. So the first wave of change games or games to change, I'd call that gamification. So gamification is rewards and incentives based. It's a conditioning based approach. Whereas humans are vastly complex creatures, we need to change our thoughts and feelings before we change our behaviour. So that's what my work is grounded on. It's about understanding that we need to have a social cognitive model of change, and then how do we layer on meaning? Well, episodic memory, stories, that's how we make meaning. So we utilise stories and then game design techniques on the end, and that's my PhD. And I'll just finish off with this one. I think the future is really promising. There's some very exciting research that's being done in terms of like the Nevermind example, where we can actually create games that through experiential type contexts, we can teach all kinds of psychological awareness, provide therapy. Opaque Space up the top, they're training astronauts with VR games. They're working in collaboration with NASA. And it's a didactic approach, but what they're actually doing is they're training anxiety reduction, because when you're changing things on the external of the International Space Station, and you can fall off at a moment's notice and fly off into space, your anxiety is pretty high. So it's actually an anxiety, training how to handle your anxiety. We're going to have situations like with the holographic. Who showed that? I think it was, therapists can go out into remote aged, or remote communities, or where there's mobility issues and all of these things. We're going to have shared social environments in VR to facilitate all kinds of social, psychological, health and wellbeing approaches. And of course, tourism of the future. Yep. So I'll finish there.
Great, thanks, Jane. So I think we've sort of progressed through from thinking around some of the some of the technologies and some of the applications to really starting to think about some of the future applications. And I think the biofeedback is an excellent example of that sort of thing that we can start to expect or start to design or start to plan for. And I think, the applications that you and Simon have showed, indicate that there's a great potential for a range of different industries. Applications that Ash and Paul have shown really help us think about our own learning or our own healthcare into the future as well. So first of all, I wanted to thank all of you for being able to pull out, really relevant and different aspects of this topic, and to allow us to explore it in a way that is a little bit different to just thinking about the tool. Or just thinking about what is the next iPhone as the end of the discussion, but actually start thinking about what can life look like when we can simulate, when we can get instant feedback, when we can put ourselves into different worlds, and how does that prepare us for actually also being better in the world that we've got, which brings me back to that other question, are realities, different realities real?